It's not too surprising that we have such contrasting opinions about what's happening. Let me begin by expressing my own appreciation of the security challenges which we have. I think they come from three main sources. If we ignore what we recognize as the civilian one anyway, kidnapping also, that's a civilian phenomenon which has escalated in recent times, that is right throughout the country. So as child rape, women, gender abuse, everything violent has been on the increase. But I'm talking about those which seem to be the three most structured and partisan in the sense that there's an identification of source. It's not as disparate as what I call the civil criminalities which we're accustomed. One of them, of course, is Boko Haram. I think everybody recognizes that. Boko Haram stroke ISWAP, these cousins of Al-Shabaab, Answardine, and all the other extremist, violent fundamentalists. Then there's the second one, which is called banditry. Banditry. When I hear the expression banditry, for instance, my historic sense is a little bit longer than others. The reason is this: people are talking just about cattle alone. We'll come to that third one in a moment. But how did what we now call banditry begin? I believe that it actually emanated from Zamfara and was as a result of the hidden gold, illegal gold mining, unacknowledged, which has been taking place there. I think even some of the measures taken by former governors of that place had nothing to do with religion, even though religion was used as an excuse. It really had to do with control of the gold mines, which has been going on for years in this country without it being publicly acknowledged until recently. Anywhere there is gold, there's banditry. Go and take a look at all nations which have mined gold. Gold somehow is a violent metal. Beautiful, we all love it, and so on. It's the acknowledged universal currency throughout societies, throughout history, and so on. So wherever there is gold, don't let's underestimate, even if it's hidden, the kind of fight, the kind of violence, sneak attacks, and the determination to control that source to the, shall we say, to the deprivation of the rest of society. Remember, the gold rush. Why do we think it'll be different here? Thirdly, and most prominently, then, the cattle. The cattle one is the most dangerous because it is identified, even though gold is identified with, let us say, Zamfara, and we know there's some gold in Ondo as well, and one or two other places, and the other minerals. But cattle has been the most intractable because it has reached the violence connected with cattle has become attached to a particular tribe. And I like to bring people back to that. When I hear about stereotyping and ethnic profiling and so on, I always like us to remember those who were responsible in the first place for the ethnic profiling. And it was the Mayati Allah in particular. I'll explain. I can tell from our own personal usage of language and words, even in my intervention, be always very careful. I never use the expression Fulani herdsmen until Mayati Allah itself openly and publicly acknowledged and boasted that the killings, the rustling of the destruction of farmlands and so on, and I'm referring to the Benue, which was sort of the shall we say, the index state, and boasting that, yes, and threatening that government, saying, Either you rescind your legally formulated injunction, something within your rights and your responsibility as a government, either you rescind it or you will get more of the same. That association threatened this nation, the entirety of the nation, not just Benue, threatened, the already fragile cohesion of the nation by insisting that there are governments beside the ones which the people of this nation have elected. It went further, if you remember, to remind the citizens of that area that they had conquered that zone before, that really this was their territory and that they had a right to reclaim it any way they want. So when people are being, castigated for seeming to stereotype a particular crime, I want us to remember that Mighty Allah claimed the crime for its own in the first instance, after which I felt, free to follow and say, okay, we now know on the admission of the perpetrators themselves, so you cannot blame the rest of the nation for profiling. So these are the three directions of the violence assailing us at the moment, and the most dangerous, I believe, and I think we'll all agree, is the one which is associated with any ethnic groupings which make up this nation, whichever grouping it is. I make no apology for my passion about children. I'm not sentimental. Youths, they grow up to be criminals, pederasts, extortionists, etc., etc. But I believe that there is a phase in one's existence which should be sacrosanct. There should be at least that phase of quote-unquote innocence, a condition in which a certain recognized sector of any society, any human gathering, has a right to claim protection, extra care in terms of their within the compass of their growing up. We've all been through that. And I think to deny that age group, which we call the youth, to deny them that right of being protected from trauma, which kidnapping involves, to be put through that brutality. Those who are responsible for that, for me, are below humanity. They shouldn't even be considered human to start with. It's as elementary as that. The rest of us also, however, must expiate a level of guilt for being so complacent, so careless, so forgetful of history, of precedents, that we allow this to happen again and again. And I'm not talking about individual criminalities now. I'm talking about those categories of violence that I began by enunciating. That whenever a thing like that happens, that state for me has a responsibility of taking some kind of drastic action, such as just saying we're shutting down until these children are restored. In which we say we have no other duty right now, no priority beyond recovering that generation of victims. Shekau dances in front of cameras. We have your children. What are you going to do about it? We're going to sell them into slavery, and so on. So such people need to be exterminated. And if we cannot exterminate them immediately, at least society must rise in repudiation, in active repudiation, in one form or another. Well, I support any kind of effort, and I actually find laudable any action which involves personal risk. The question, however, in what I call the Gumi approach, is the theology that goes with it. Now, that is problematic, because it looks as if it's going in there to plead the cause of violators not the violated. That, for me, is my problem with what I call the Gumi theory. He's using language which, for me, is pernicious. In a moment, he will get the victims feeling guilty that they allowed themselves to have been kidnapped in the first place. That is the logical conclusion of that kind of language. If he says he goes there to negotiate, negotiation has been taking place, with bandits throughout history and throughout the whole globe, the entire globe. I was involved in negotiation by MEND, for instance. It was possible for me to relate to MEND, but at the same time, and ask them. I said, I do not approve of your kidnapping. I do not absolutely approve. I think I was probably the first person in this country to speak up against such tactics. And we used to argue, they used to come and see me, and I said, that I cannot support. And talking even about adults, how much more vulnerable children? So Gumi needs to, I think, get both his approach and his language right, so that there is, so that he doesn't present himself as being complicitous to the very phenomenon of kidnapping. Oh, I've said that over and over again. And I recommend, I'm not the only one, by the way, I recommend, for instance, Tony Nyam's interview on the television Arise. I recommend it. I recommend also, I have not seen her statement, but recently, the last few days, I think Obi Ekwesili made a similar statement saying that there's nobody in charge. And in fact, she went further and said that whatever mechanism we have, political governance mechanism we have, should be evoked to examine if Buhari is really capable of governing, if he's actually governing, if he's physically and mentally, capable at the moment. And she's even gone that far. And I've said, I use the expression Rip Van Winkle. In other words, that's the mythology of the man who slept for several decades and woke up eventually after so many years to find the world had changed around him. This one will wake up one day and find Nigeria is gone. He will wake up saying the sovereignty of Nigeria cannot be compromised. And people will ask him, sorry, which Nigeria are you talking about? That's what I feel about the center. Somebody defamed me recently. We'll be hearing more about that in someday. And I used the expression, I said, for me to be accused of this thing, I said I must have committed some crime in previous life, because certainly it's not in this one. I know my history, personal history very well, and I know that I didn't go anywhere in that direction ever. But for somebody, for me, to have the gall to try and pin this on me, I said it has to be the law of karma that I must in previous life. Well, I wish to apply the same analogy to Nigeria. I think there's a crime we Nigerians committed in previous lives that we've been saddled, Africans, that we've been saddled with the kind of leadership we've had all over the place. Of course, there are exceptions, but nobody seems to take much notice of the exceptions, or they don't seem to have any influence on the rest. But generally, I'm really beginning to be converted to the law of karma, whether individually or collectively. I think there's something we did in some previous lives for which we've been punished with the majority of the leadership of the continent. Well, it shouldn't surprise anyone. For a start, we're not operating as a nation, by which I mean we're not operating on a constitution that has our will. This kind of call, we didn't experience it, did we, at the immediate post-independence, until the first military coup. We didn't really experience this kind of, loud and rather determined sequence of calls from different parts. Oh, I know we had Araba at one stage. But this was after the first military coup. And then there was Araba secession, which came from the north. And that has been echoed over the years from different parts, simply because the events, the issues which resulted in one section being wanting to secede have never been addressed. On the contrary, those problems have been compounded. They've been compounded by the centralized constitution imposed on the nation, which even negated what I call limited autonomy of collective action by the components of what goes by the name Nigeria. And we've been regressing ever since. The kind of advanced development, healthy rivalry, which took place, which existed immediate post-independence, has vanished, become self-centered, acerbic, all the power, because all the power has gone to the center, or the major part of power and control and governance decisions and even policy making has gone to the center, making the others dependent on whatever cabal happens to be at the center.